Most people have a place they think of as home all their lives. But for some, home is not a place, it's a state of mind. Our passports say American, but we're really citizens of the world. We're the children of the American soldier. Our spiritual siblings are the military children of all countries. I was one of those children. My daddy was a general in the Air Force, and both my grandfathers were military officers. It was a strange and interesting childhood. Cruel, magical, privileged, and painful, all at the same time. About 5% of Americans belong to this subculture, a kind of invisible nation growing up on every continent except the Arctic poles. They say we've shaped America's destiny with an influence far beyond our numbers. I know one thing for sure. My childhood has shaped me in ways I'm only beginning to understand.
From? I don't know. I was born in San Francisco, and I kind of consider that my home, but I never lived there.
I'm from everywhere.
Oh, boy, I'm not.
I tell everybody I was born in New Jersey, but I was raised in the Army.
That was always a loaded question for me, because it was, well, do I tell them about the place I was at last, which I didn't really feel was my place, or the place where I really wanted to be from, but I had to move away from, or the place where my relatives live and where we're supposed to be from, but we don't really belong there except for maybe a couple of weeks out of the summertime when we go to visit.
I'm a military brat. That's my answer. That when people ask me that, that's the answer.
Civilians often think that the term brat is a derogatory term and they're afraid to use it with us. But in fact, we military brats do not have any objections to that term, most of us, that is. And I think it's because it implies a kind of spunkiness and gumption, and those are the qualities that get a kid through the military life.
Officially, we're called dependents, and we've been following soldiers since the birth of this nation. In the beginning, we were mostly officers' kids because enlisted soldiers were not allowed to marry.
I don't know how the term came into being, but I do know that in the Oxford English Dictionary, about the 5th definition down from the word brat, it says a child, usually insignificant.
If you had asked me as a child, are you more important to your daddy or is the military? I would have said probably the military.
That was just something that came with the deal. It was a part of the deal. And so if we had to give up some personal freedoms, if we had to give up some conveniences in order to support my dad, we were willing to do it, and we didn't question it.
I'm not saying that children are not important in military families. Of course they are. Parents love their children in military families. But parents are not free to make decisions around the needs of children. The parents in the military must do what they are told to do.
The bottom line for the military is to fight and win the nation's wars. That's the mission of the military in a nutshell.
Soldiers willingly sacrifice themselves and their families to accomplish this mission. While honorable, this selfless service has consequences for us, some positive, some negative.
You really did feel a sense of community. Without knowing everybody individually, you knew each other. You had a bond.
But look at what happens when our military parents are killed in action. Within weeks, we're pulled out of our base school and moved out of our base house. We have to leave that community right when we need it the most.
My experience has always been the military has been very sensitive to that. They don't just walk and say, okay, you know, your husband's dead, get out, get out of here. They try very hard to, but again, it's got to be balanced. It's got to take into effect those people that are still around too.
Dr. Stephanie Donaldson-Pressman is a therapist who specializes in military families. She calls this type of environment the narcissistic family.
The premise is that in these families, the emotional needs of the children are sacrificed to meet the needs of the parents. For whatever reasons, whether it's drug use or the father's career, unemployment, poverty, that parent system becomes very self-involved.
Because the military mission always takes precedence over a brat's needs, all military families to a degree fall into this category. The Great Santini by Pat Conroy was one of the first books to explore this catch-22 from our point of view, the Brats.
Okay, hogs. I've listened to you bellyache about moving to this new town. This said bellyaching will end as of 15:30 hours. Will not affect the morale of the squadron henceforth. Do I make myself clear?
Yes, sir.
That was our life. It wasn't as abusive as that, but the principles and the values and the I am the head of this household and there is a way to live life and this is it and you need to do what I say.
I don't remember ever questioning anything where I was given an order or a command or anything. I was pretty reliable.
Mary Wirch was one of the first nonfiction authors to address the emotional and psychological implications of being a brat.
It's marvelous because I think up until as recently as 10 years ago, most military brats felt that their experience was absolutely unique.
It made me realize that I belonged, but that I belonged nowhere like every other military brat. That I only belonged to this sort of mental concept of an experience that everybody shared.
Now, my book does not focus on those negative things to the exclusion of the positive, because I very strongly believe that military childhoods have very strong positives as well as some negatives, and we need to understand all aspects of the experience.
It was good in a lot of senses because I got to move around a lot. I got to see places of the world that most people didn't have a chance to see, and I got to make a lot of friends. But on the flip side of that, I moved around a lot.
With these families, it's very hard in adulthood for the child to come to terms with what he or she grew up with. They can understand that they had to be sacrificed to some extent to further the greater good, namely the career of their father, the maintenance of their family, and the protection of the United States of America. And it's really quite noble when you think about it. Now, the other area is, how did this affect you as a human being?
Of course, no two military families are identical, but we are different from most civilian families. We're all thoroughly embedded in what Mary Wirch calls the fortress.
This is the American Forces Network, a collection of wires, tubes, and microphones serving American forces in Europe.
Living on base is such a sense of security.
It's a little odd to have people walking down the street with rifles and M16s and, but it's normal. That's their job.
My favorite thing about base life was just the sheer number of kids that would be available for play at any given time.
You wanted to try out for something? You could actually get in.
Hi, this is Wolfman Jack on AFN Munich.
We'd go to the AYA, which is the American Youth Association, and there'd be dances and go to the movie, go to the snack bar.
All these benefits are provided free of charge or at very reduced prices, as long as you have an ID card to get in. Even food and clothing are discounted.
There's socialized medicine. There is housing for which you do not pay. There's a whole atmosphere of conformity that is more associated with a socialist way of life.
Every military base looks more or less the same. Officers are in one area, NCO or enlisted families in another, and single soldiers in a third.
But you all knew that everybody was going to end up shopping in the same place, the commissary, most likely, the PX.
We even pray in the same building. Catholics, Protestants, Jews, and Muslims, just at different times of the day. They're like Hollywood versions of 50s small towns, surrounded by barbed wire, often in the middle of foreign countries.
I think people from military families are unique. I think in many ways they're much like kids from missionary families and State Department families, especially those who have lived overseas.
Professors Ruth Hill and John Useem coined a special term for us, TCKs, or Third Culture Kids, because our identity is a mixture of all the countries in which we've lived.
And I think also because you're basically on the front lines of the military defense, there's a lot of different pressures and a different perspective for military brats than the civilians don't even realize.
Final precautionary measure, over 3,000 Navy and Marine wives and children are evacuated from Guantanamo. Although a direct military confrontation with the Soviet Union may be less than 72 hours away, few civilians are aware of the impending crisis.
Growing up around that kind of a thing, it's kind of like, wow, you know, this is a scary, serious thing. I'm 14 years old. I don't know how to deal with this. And they didn't really talk to you about it either. You kind of just talked about it with your friends. Is your dad going to the Gulf? Yeah. Is your dad? No.
I was 11 and 12 in Saigon, Vietnam. My dad was the air attaché for South Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, and was stationed over there in 1960, 61, and 62. We took our 1959 Oldsmobile over there, which had great big fins on it, impressed everybody. And they built a highway that was 15 miles long. And so Sunday afternoon, my dad loved to take Sunday drives, and so we'd go charging out of town for the 15 miles and then turn around and come charging back to town. And that was our Sunday drive. Well, then we couldn't do that anymore because where you did the U-turn, they'd pick us off, and so we were advised not to, you know, drive out of town anymore.
Were you afraid?
Sure, there were a lot of machine guns around. There were a lot of tanks around. And I think most people don't know how big a tank is until they see it going down your street.
The laws on a military base are different from civilian America's, too. That's how President Truman was able to integrate the military in 1948. He issued an executive order as commander-in-chief forcing the military to integrate, and Congress refused to do it.
You were blue or you were green or you were khaki, and you were Americans.
The military is the only place in American society where black people and Hispanic people routinely boss around white people.
I never looked at somebody as a black officer. I looked at them as an officer. I never looked at someone as a black soldier. I looked at them as a member of the Army, and we were a team.
The other thing that is very unique, I think, to growing up on a military base is the fact that you don't have control over who your neighbors are. And it forced an integration in neighborhoods that really, and even in the United States today, you don't see.
Black military brats, particularly those who are 30 and younger, have had the advantage of growing up in a fortress where it was against the law, against the Uniform Code of Military Justice, for anyone to make a racist remark or to fail to intervene when someone else makes one.
In the military, on those bases, when I was there, zero tolerance for race and racism. Didn't matter what you thought, you could not act on it. The soldiers could go out, have their little riots and do everything like that, but it better not be in the school system.
This may be one of the reasons brats, 40% of whom are minorities, routinely outscore their public school peers. why 3 times as many get college degrees.
I scored in the 97th percentile of the Scholastic Aptitude Test. It means only 3% of people in the United States did better than me that particular year.
But only his military teacher in Germany told George's parents he was college material. His civilian teachers in New Jersey didn't seem to notice.
They said I was a good student, I dressed well, that's one of these kinds of things, he might be black, but he dresses real nice.
No one's ever studied race relations amongst children of military families. We've done quite a bit of research on race relations amongst soldiers, but very little nothing as far as kids are concerned.
I'm sure on an individual basis there is prejudice, but on the whole there isn't. And I feel like when people from different backgrounds and of different races have to live together and work together on a daily basis to where they really, really get to know each other, they really understand that one group is not less capable than the other group, and some of those prejudices start to disappear.
Of course, growing up military isn't all shiny and happy.
With most of the military lifestyle, you get paid once a month, so you ate well on payday and got all the groceries, and then as it winded down, the closer you got to payday, the less you had in the cupboard to eat.
And every time you move, you have a weight limit on how much you can actually ship back and forth. And the weight limits are based on your rank. Every time you move, you have to buy new cars or buy a car. You have to buy all new kitchenware, towels, curtains, just little things that you take for granted in your house. You spend all your money on it.
From date of detachment, it's usually around 6 months or so before a couple like yourselves would get housing. Look at it as an adventure.
Many lower enlisted families are on welfare. And I think Americans would be surprised how many soldiers aren't receiving government assistance, like food stamps.
Officers' families like my own fare a little better when it comes to salaries and moving allowances. But all of us are subject to what Mary Wirch calls the Hall of Mirrors.
I learned fairly early on that anything that I did reflected directly back on my father and his career, especially his career.
If a man's children misbehave, the question is then posed, how can he have command of his troops?
I always felt that that was very unfair because my father could only have so much control over me, especially in those adolescent years.
On the other hand, it's a powerful tool if one is really angry to know that if you do something, you may be able to completely sabotage your father's career. And one of the ways that children can rebel against their parents and get into trouble and yet have a built-in excuse is, oh, I was drunk. I was at a party, somebody brought a six-pack, I had too much, and I didn't really mean to run your car onto the CO's front lawn. Oops, just happened.
Because anything we do can reflect negatively on our parents, our lives are often full of rules which are strictly enforced.
When you call a person's home, you never say, "Let me talk to."
I know what fork to pick up and what fork to use and what knife to use and how to use it and how to keep my elbows off the table.
If you didn't stop at 5 o'clock when they lowered the flag, I think they would have shot you. I mean, it's out of respect, don't get me wrong, and I think it's a great tradition, but everybody stopped. I mean, it was common sense.
And I mean, if a child fails to get off his bike and just keeps on pedaling, even as retreat is being audibly played. The child is reported not to his father, but to his father's commanding officer.
In the military, I don't think that it's about what you did. I think it's about you did what I told you not to do. And maybe that's something instilled into the soldiers, but I think a lot of things were definitely blown out of proportion.
When Bill was 8, he was punished for playing with matches and lighting a small campfire.
They sit me in the corner and they say, "You're going to sit in the corner for the next year, 365 days. You will only get up to use the bathroom, go to bed, and go to school. You will eat your meals, you will do your homework, you will do everything else in the corner." So I spent a year in the corner. I had homework to do, but no comic books, no TV, no friends. And I never forgot. I never forgot that.
Rules exist in terms of discipline, in terms of chain of command, that are on the one hand dehumanizing, but they are designed so that in time of war, in time of crisis, everybody knows their job, everybody will take orders, they won't question orders, when seconds can count. The problem is that that is not really the best environment for bringing up children, because the job of children is to question, and it is to make mistakes, and you don't learn that unless you experience it.
Appearances were very important in my family. We were very mindful that wherever we went, we were being observed, particularly when we lived abroad. We represented America and the military wherever we went.
My brother and I both played football. We were on kind of the B team. We weren't really people that played in games very much. My father wasn't that interested in sports, but when he did come, we would be coming from the game and he would have his camera out and make us pose in front of the other football players, which was to me extremely humiliating.
I know it's rough to leave your friends and move every year, but you are Marine kids and can chew nails while other kids are sucking cotton candy. And you're Meachams. Meacham is a thoroughbred, a winner all the way. Gets the best grades, wins the most awards, and excels in sports. Meacham never gives up.
Well, military families have really high expectations of their children. I think that's a good thing. As long as the expectations don't get too high to where they can't be achieved, then you have problems, because that lowers a person's self-esteem.
Margot tried to kill herself 4 times in high school.
It's not that I wanted to die so much, although I was kind of doing some existential angst. It was just like there was so much pressure to do well, to get good grades, to be perfect. I was in student government, I was in all the plays, I was doing everything I was supposed to do, but I was just tired of it all. I remember cutting my wrist. I remember seeing the blood go into the toilet. I remember this feeling of relief. It was never talked about after I was taken to the hospital. So basically the message I got was, better take care of yourself, because nobody else is going to take care of you. Which is the attitude you always have when you're a kid, I think, in the military anyway. You better be able to do things for yourself. You know, whether it's clean up the campsite, do this, move, never complain, rise to the occasion.
All this discipline and achievement and positive thinking does turn us into well-mannered kids when we want to be, and hellacious rebels when we don't. But it doesn't encourage self-reflection.
You have to, amidst all these rules and all of the punishments and consequences, you have to find out who you are, what you're good at, what you want to do with your life.
It's what most of us call growing up, which is a tall order for anyone under the best of circumstances. But for a brat struggling alone to cope with real tragedy, it can take a lifetime to undo the damage.
At the age of 11, I was raped on a military installation by a soldier. One of the soldiers and I were in the water and playing around, and he was with another friend of his. One of them had asked me if I wanted a drink or a candy bar, something from the vending machine. but instead of taking me to the vending machines, I was grabbed and pulled away from the pool into some brush and trees.
It took Heather 4 years to build up the courage to tell her parents.
I went through a really, really hard time and a lot of depression, and to the point where I was hospitalized. And nobody knew the real reason I was hospitalized. You didn't tell them that your daughter was hospitalized for depression because she got raped by somebody in the military on a military installation. You didn't say that. She's ill. It's like you're expected to keep these deep, dark secrets, and then you're expected to grow up and be this normal, functioning adult.
Every morning at the line, you could see him arrive. He stood 5'6", about 185, about as broad at the shoulder as it was at the hip. Everybody knew he didn't give a shit, the Sky King. Now some said Sky was born in New Orleans, where he built himself a rotor on a sewing machine, cut his teeth on a collective pitch. Old Sky was a low-flying son of a bitch, Sky King. Sky King, Sky King, short, fat Sky.
Oh yes, we had the white glove inspections. My dad, when he would return home, he was gone quite often, and when he would return home, the first thing he would do was inspect our rooms.
Of course my father was always right. If he was wrong, it's because we thought he was probably wrong, but he never was really wrong.
Now, I don't want you to consider me as just your commanding officer. I want you to look on me like I was, well, God.
Not all soldiers are authoritarian. My daddy took great pains to leave his work at the office. But few civilian organizations are as intimately involved in a family's personal life as the military.
Probably the hardest thing that I had to deal with in high school was the fraternization rules. And the rule was just cut and dried. Officers did not mingle with enlisted people.
The reason for this segregation is because you're talking about a group of people who have to go to war. There are people who are going to be giving orders, there are people who are going to be taking orders, and it gets confused if those people develop intense personal relationships.
Military parents aren't officially required to apply this rule to their children, and many don't. But when they do, it's tough to deal with, especially when we live so close together and are otherwise completely integrated.
There were several times when I would go to pick up somebody for a date, and invariably they say, "So, what does your dad do?" Which is just another way of saying, "What's his rank?" And I'd say, "Oh, he's a master gunnery sergeant." And we would usually go out on that date, but if I asked her out again, she would say, "No, I'm not supposed to go out with you again."
The patriarchal nature of the military is also challenging, particularly in adolescence, when we're trying to figure out the yin and the yang of our personalities.
Women on a military base are treated, I think, well in public, but behind male doors, I think they're totally treated differently.
Women were valued for the degree to which they assisted their husbands' careers.
Is their wife funny? Is their wife, can she throw a good party? Is she supportive? Can she keep things under control?
A University of Georgia study comparing civilian and military adolescents shows how these messages affect us.
The group that had the highest self-esteem were the military boys. They attributed that to the military really being a place that built their confidence. You know, there's a lot of guys around willing to coach Little League softball, Mighty Mite football, making them feel fantastic for who they are. The people with the lowest self-esteem in the study were military girls. And that made sense as well because there weren't a lot of role models for them in terms of the kinds of things that they may want to do. There weren't a lot of resources.
Am I a Meacham, Dad? Can girls be real Meachams? Girls without jump shots? Or am I a simple form of Meacham, like in biology? Marianne, the one-celled Meacham.
Marianne, scram, I'm starting to lose my temper. Lillian!
A daughter has to figure out what her place is within the world of the fortress. What does it take for her to earn the approval of her father and of all the other fathers in general? Well, it's a very limited role for a daughter. She can never be the warrior that a son could be, for example. So her options are she can be beautiful and dutiful, or she can be completely invisible. There's no option to rebel in a constructive way.
I felt that really strong pressure to look right all the time.
Which is why, by the way, bulimia and anorexia are seen so very commonly among female military adolescents.
The problem of the military son is that there's only one acceptable model of manhood.
ZFM Kaiserslautern. Not for wimps, weirdos, or weenies.
So if he's not that kind of boy, if he has more academic interests, if he's gay, for instance, or if he's just not interested in the military model, it's very risky for him.
I wanted to be a songwriter when I graduated from college, but I had to join the military first. Period. Serving was just part of being a man. Other boys report more extreme attempts to toughen them up.
Me, Jocko, kick your butt. Now, come on, guard me. You gotta win by 2. I'm not gonna guard you, Dad. Hey, mama's boy. Mama's boy. I bet you're gonna cry. Come on, mama's boy. Let's see you cry. Come on. Squirt if you. Come on, cry. Come on, cry. Come on. Come on. Just a few.
I received no end of criticism. I just couldn't measure up at any level. I was worthless. No good, never amount to anything, lazy, and there was just, it was unrelenting.
It's funny because, there so many times, like the social part of my dad, I'm very angry with. But then there's Master Sergeant Rockholt, United States Air Force, who to me is a hero. He served in Vietnam, he's highly decorated. To me, I respect that person so much.
Daddy was a charmer, boys, he had a lot of style. He was a shining best at everything he did. They said that he could lighten up a room with just a smile. I was proud as hell to be his kid. Seemed like just as we were growing close together, he was gone. But it was long enough to show what I could be. And I sometimes feel his spirit fill my body like a song. This is what my daddy sings to me. If they feel you down and dirty in a way you don't deserve, you feel better if you take it like a man. If you let them drive you crazy, boy, they'll shut your business down. Shake it off and get your licks in when you can. 'Cause the heart is all that matters in the end.
Unfortunately for some, this is when the real battle begins. When the guns are put away and all the parades are over, and the brutality of war comes home to the family.
I remember going to the airport to pick my dad up. It was June of 1970. And my brother had long hair, I had long frizzy hair, and I remember him kind of looking a little puzzled. And then it slowly dawned on him that he had come back to these kids who he didn't recognize.
Physically, he was incredibly fit. And I'd never seen my dad like that. He looked like a superhero. Emotionally, he seemed quite shaken. When he went to Vietnam, he was still a VPI cadet, duty, honor. He believed so firmly in those tenets of service. And when he got to Vietnam, he found out that there were glory-hungry generals who were willing to send his troops into ambush. He found out that there were South Vietnamese colonels who were basically in cahoots with the North Vietnamese. I mean, it was just on so many fronts, it completely undermined his sense of the world. His core beliefs were shaken.
His patience level was like a hair trigger. We were at dinner table once as a family and the salt shaker was not filled. He was having trouble shaking it. And so he threw it up against the wall at close range, barely missing my head, and it left an indentation in a plasterboard wall.
But few soldiers are willing to talk about their problems, much less seek medical help, because nothing they say is confidential. Some turn to alcohol for solace.
Dinner was not something I ever looked forward to because it was always the same thing. My dad would start drinking as soon as he got off work. By the time dinner had come around, he'd finished another bottle or two, falling literally his face into the meal, if not throwing up at the dinner table. I mean, this was so much a pattern. It was literally daily like this. Then my mom would get upset because he was so drunk. They would argue, she would cry. My mom would go to the bedroom. My dad would fall asleep in his chair and I would go to my room and start getting high. It was my escape. And honestly, I don't know what I'd have done otherwise.
By the military's own studies, there's at least twice the rate of alcoholism in the military as there is in the civilian sector. And very likely it is considerably higher than that because the military study only looked at the members in uniform and did not look at the spouses of those members.
You know, when he left home to go over to Iran, you know, he very ceremoniously presented me the West Point sword. And to a small boy, when your father hands you the sword and says, "You're now the man of the house, take care of your mother and sisters," you take that very seriously. I took it very seriously. And of course, you know, we had a lot of problems. We really had a dysfunctional family because of my mother's alcoholism that I discovered sort of, you know, I didn't know what was going on, but all I knew is things weren't right. They weren't the way they were supposed to be.
They got in an argument, Mom and Dad, one day. We were in Germany, and I was, you know, teenager in high school, and I said, I can't take this anymore. So I walked out of the apartment complex, and I came back. It's 4 o'clock in the morning, and Dad's walking up the sidewalk as I'm walking up from the other way, and he says, "Well, I broke your mother's arm." He said, "Come on upstairs, go to bed." I mean, and what do? Punch your dad?
The military offers help for families, but few take advantage of it for the same reason soldiers don't. It's immediately reported to the commanding officer, who can court-martial or demote the soldier, lowering the whole family's pay in retirement. Just putting a note in an officer's efficiency report about alcohol abuse, even a troublemaking kid, can essentially end that officer's career.
Your stomach just turns inside out, and your fear is, you know, turns to panic. And you don't want to get out of bed because you don't want to see what's going on, but you want to get out of bed to see if you can help. So you're really torn to what to do. Then the next morning you get up, and it's like a tornado's been through the house, but no one says anything. It's all quiet. Like it didn't happen. Like, okay, just go on. And you know, you kind of struggle with, well, what happened? What? And we wouldn't find out, you know, ever.
Seen another soldier who got wasted in the war. Said he left his soul there overseas.
The
the first time I ever saw the wall in Vietnam. And I was just cried because there should be a wall for people like my dad. He didn't die until, 10 years later, 12, longer than that, 1996. But he was as equally devastated and killed by the war and the military as anybody on that wall. No question.
You really believe in freedom? I said I do. He said, oh, what about me?
Thank you. Thank you.
We moved 17 times in the first 24 years of our marriage.
23 houses in 18 schools, mostly the United States, Europe, and Asia, Turkey and the Middle East area.
That was normal. So what would be odd would to live in the same small town for 18 years before you go to college. That would be strange.
Routinely, military families will do a tour overseas, be it Germany, Italy, or indeed anywhere in the world that we have a military embassy. A military family could be sent there.
Living overseas was, I think, the single greatest thing about being a military brat. Just to realize that America is not the center of the universe is, I think, an important thing.
I got to ride gondolas in Venice, play cat and mouse with my brothers in the Colosseum in Rome. I rode camels around the pyramids. What kid can say that and not realize that he's had a great life?
When he was 12, General Schwarzkopf lived in Iran. One night, his daddy took him to dinner with a desert tribe in a tent.
And when it came time to eat, they brought out the whole sheep on the platter and that sort of thing, and promptly took out one of the sheep's eyeballs and presented it to my father to eat with great ceremony, because that was just a wonderful thing to do for your guest of honor, was to give him the sheep's eye. And so my father ate it, and then at that time there was a lot of talk going on. They're talking about you being the firstborn son of the general, and that gives you a very special position and that sort of thing. And so they're going to honor you too. And with that, they brought the sheep's eye over to me to eat. and I took one look at this thing and I said, I'm not going to eat that thing. And my father said, yes, you are, and so.
Everywhere we went, we were a spectacle. Here we were, two African-American children. We would drive this horrendously big American car. So although we were out seeing the sights, I believe we were the sight that people were noticing more often than not.
Some of the most life-changing experiences occur when we move to post-war countries. Joan and Bill moved to Germany shortly after World War II.
You had all these displaced people who could not go back to their country, who had lost all their families. They were the survivors of the camps, and so they had no place to live, no place to go.
Some brats attended the Nuremberg trials on field trips and saw the films used as evidence.
Seeing the losers' side of it made us much more aware of how terrible it can be, because so many German women lost fathers and brothers and husbands and had no one to support them.
So I felt like I was a part of a grand experiment, and it took part in a lot of activities in scouting and German-American clubs. There was a great deal of curiosity as to how much we were alike and how much we were different. we would look at each other and realize that our fathers fought each other, and yet we felt very much that we wanted to make a world whole.
Of course, moving every 2 or 3 years does have its disadvantages. For some of us, returning home to America is more of a culture shock than living overseas.
It's not like, you know, when you go overseas and you come back 2 weeks later from a trip. It was like being locked away in a time capsule.
There are whole years in 1965 and 66 when there's trivia shows about television shows, and I'm pretty good at trivia. I have no knowledge of those shows. It's always very, oh, that was the year I was in Ethiopia. I didn't watch TV for 2 years.
Even though I was only gone for about 3 years, we weren't used anymore to being looked at primarily by race kinds of things. Walking into a store and being followed because you're black.
I was always out of sync with whatever was going on with the culture, the lessons, totally at odds with what should have been my peers, but they never felt like my peers.
Probably the hardest part of being a brat is all the loss we have to live with.
I counted up all the little doggy names one time that I could remember, and there were 21. We did not move with our dogs.
It just became this routine. You left one place knowing you were going to another place to leave it.
That means so many changes of friends, of teachers, of coaches, of everyone in a child's life apart from their immediate family. A child experiences loss of incredible numbers of people. The difficulties also increase as the child goes up in age, so that if there are several moves during high school, it is extremely traumatic for the child.
I mean, I was picked in the 8th grade the most likable guy. I thought, man, this is going to be great. High school is going to be wonderful. Then we moved.
Saying goodbye to things you've grown to love. Letting go. The loneliness. It brings out all the weaknesses inside of you when you are trying your best to cope.
Sometimes I would take it out by, you know, if my girlfriend was leaving, and you know, I would be kind of mean or angry or something like that for you know, just before she was leaving. It was real easy to break up because, you know, we were mad at each other. Other times I would just sit down and listen to, you know, some old songs and cry in bed.
But if we cried, we usually cried alone because tears were taboo in many of our families.
Yeah, you weren't allowed to cry about personal pain. That's different. Crying because a piece of music is beautiful is a different kind of crying than crying because you've hit your thumb with a hammer. Then you had to suck it up and just deal. Oh, come on, that's not that bad. What are you crying about? You know, that's not that bad.
When children live in a narcissistic family environment, it's actually pretty interesting. They develop tremendous survival skills. They have to make it through childhood. What these children learn to do very well is to read other people and then to become the manifestation of that person's wants, needs, desires. What they don't learn is how to know themselves, how to be able to understand their own feelings, their own needs, and how to be able to self-validate.
You got over it. You know, that was the way Dad would put it, get over it. And you did. You kind of swept it up under wherever and you didn't look back.
Then one day, there went everything I knew and everything I was used to. And that was the hardest thing in the world for me.
When brats graduate or get married, whichever comes first, our ID cards are taken away. We can't go on base or access base services unaccompanied anymore, even if our parents still live there.
And it really felt like military exile. I was, well, what do I do now? Where do I shop? And what if I get sick? And where do I go? And this as a 21-year-old.
Everything in the military is proscribed. People know their roles, they know what they're supposed to do, they know how to achieve success, and as long as they're in that situation, they'll do just fine. Move them out of that situation, and they will not necessarily do just fine.
How fine seems to depend on how relaxed our parents are. If they encourage our individuality and let us do our own thing, we generally turn out okay.
If the family ideal is the father's ideal and the family's career is the father's career and the children are expected at all costs to further that, they're probably going to have problems in later life. Difficulty with commitment, a depressed sense of self-importance, a paper tiger thing where people can be very tough and fierce and yet they can be knocked down very easily.
Particularly if we have different tastes than our parents or want a different lifestyle than they want us to have.
Most service members come from rural America or small town America. In other words, they come, generally speaking, from rooted civilian backgrounds. And therefore, their whole orientation to life is very different from that of their own children. And they tend to forget that.
Other legacies of growing up military appear almost universal.
Any chance I can get to leave the United States and go someplace else and bask in another culture or a different culture, I'm gone. And I just give me a plane ticket, you know, and I'm out of here.
I get what I call antsy or stir crazy. I just can't be somewhere for so long where I'm in this routine day in and day out. I have to have change or I'll go nuts.
Because we move so much, brats often have excellent social skills. We can go anywhere, talk to anyone. What we have trouble with is permanence.
I've heard them periodically talk about the 3-year itch, wanting to move every 3 years in their life, and really seeing moving as an option of getting out of a bad situation.
My interests only last as long as the businesses are growing and expanding and developing. Once they reach a steady state, I lose interest and my mind starts to wander and go other directions.
And does this apply to people as well? Once it gets to a steady state, you want to move on?
I'd have to be honest and say yes.
Some of this is a self-protection device.
Because what we've learned is that loss is inevitable. The longer you know someone, the more you know it's coming soon, that you're going to lose that person.
Keeping a safe distance lessens the trauma of that. And it also, if you keep thinking of the next place you're going to go, rather than what you've got to do. I mean, to make a friend, it takes work. You open yourself up to vulnerable spots. Somebody's going to really get to know me, and what do I know about myself that I want to tell anybody? I'm never going to see you again, so why am I going to bother?
The consequences of that is they tend to continue moving throughout their life, or they go the other direction and never want to leave. They hold on to all their stuff that they've had, and they surround themselves with their stuff.
The fact of the matter is that military brats don't belong anywhere. We can't even go back to a base and feel we belong there. There's no one there anymore who knew our families or who knew us. But that doesn't mean it's all a tragedy. I think that it makes us very interesting people, as a matter of fact, because we're constantly working to incorporate elements of belonging in our lives. Buying a very old house, converting to an ancient religion, the tendency to choose as a life partner someone who grew up in only 1 or 2 houses. On top of that, you can find the benefits to not belonging. That not belonging is a state in itself, and it has the advantage of your not being overly invested in any particular group, and that gives you freedom. It's freedom to move around among different groups. And it's the freedom to forge connections between groups that might not otherwise make that connection.
I will fight and I will die for freedom. Up against an eagle or a bear. I will help my brother and we'll sink or swim together. You don't like it, mister, I don't care.
One of the most positive legacies the warrior life hands down to its children is a sense of mission and integrity, a devotion to a cause greater than oneself. My daddy certainly instilled it in me.
When I was a military dependent, I could see that my father's work had purpose. It was very clear, whether he was a pilot, an engineer, a communications officer. I knew that his work meant something. And so in my work and whatever I've done, it has to have a ring of importance. It has to have value. I can't be involved in anything that's frivolous. There's an urgency, I feel, to do something that's worthwhile.
But this is tricky in a world primarily motivated by money.
Love of money is the root of all evil. Love of money is the root of all evil.
Being in the military is not about acquiring wealth. Being in the military is basically about service. Being a civilian and being in the civilian corporate world is about acquiring wealth.
I've noticed that a lot of people will base their worth on how much money they make. I mean, it's kind of crazy, even at a social gathering, people want to ask you how much money you make, but instead they ask you, well, what do you do? Where do you live? So the real question is, how much money do you make?
Money's important because you need it to pay the bills, but it's not my main motivation for anything that I do.
Brats also tend to be open to other cultures, other religions. We know what it's like to be outsiders.
Well, I'd have some people come in sometimes over in the Gulf and say, oh gosh, we got to solve this cultural problem. See, the Arabs think this way, we think that way, and we've got to prove to them well, we're right. And I used to think that was kind of cheeky when you consider that our culture at that time was 214 years old and theirs was 5,000 years old, and we're going to tell them we're right and they're wrong.
I pledge allegiance to every human being I ever run into anywhere. I support everybody's rights, not just America's rights.
One reason why I did not stay in the ministry was because I became very discouraged. My confirmation class did not want to have any black people entering the church.
One of the difficulties is that not only is stereotyping coming from non-blacks, but also it's coming from blacks.
What you doing, man? Eating lunch. I see you eating lunch. Why you eating over here? Why don't you go on over there eat with your people?
Man, I don't have any people. I'm with everybody, Julius.
Yeah, he's just a light-skinned brother. Yeah, and I'm a dark-skinned cracker.
I've absolutely been accused of acting white by different individuals that are part of different Hispanic communities. And I consider that an enormous insult to my character, simply because you shouldn't have to act any way just because of your culture or your ethnicity or your race or any of that. You should just be exactly who it is that you are.
When Michelle was in college, she was asked to give a speech at an important event.
This was to be a big deal, to have a student deliver the keynote. And so I was a bit concerned about, well, what would I talk about? What experiences would you like me to share? I'm kind of new to this. And she said, well, tell them a little bit about your background. You're growing up in a broken family in the inner city and the struggle you had to overcome and, academically what it took for you to achieve and the hardship. And this is the kind of story that she was looking for. And obviously, this was not my story.
This does not mean we're not proud of our cultural heritage or don't want to explore it.
I'm not trying to avoid race, I'm a black male. So I'm not trying to say it's not important because there's a lot of history and culture that's very important, at least for me and my family. But that's not the primary thing of who George June is who am I? Am I an honest person? Do I treat people well?
I do have cousins my age who would argue that point with me, who would say, Val, get down off your horse. You've been over there with all them good people and that, life's not that grand and this is, come look at where we live. Well, I can look at where you live, but do something about it. I mean, don't wait on somebody else to help you. You can make a difference and you can make a change on your own.
There are downsides to all this idealism and conviction, of course, primarily reality. For all our worldly experiences, we can be really naive.
A lady came into our office one day and needed some money to get her kid because her car was broke down. And I forget the whole sad story. I gave her 85 bucks. Total stranger, 85 bucks. She said, thank you very much, I'll bring it back tomorrow. Never saw the woman again. Now, Trusting, is that stupid or is that trusting? I think that's stupid.
We can also come across as arrogant, self-righteous, and stubborn as mules, despite our insecurities.
There is right and wrong, and I don't understand when people don't do the right thing. I've been accused of having an overdeveloped sense of right and wrong and being a moral zealot, somebody called me once.
A lot of this is the result of feeling so out of control when we're kids. So when we grow up, we either resign ourselves to fate or try to control everything around us, often at the same time.
In my personal relationships with men, well, I get accused of always trying to lead when we go out dancing together.
I think my being a perfectionist does try to keep me from being criticized for what I do. I did not have that critical of a mother and father. They weren't too critical of me and what I did. At least, well, let me back up. That's not true, now that I think about it. I would have to say my father was very critical of my work product. It was funny because whenever I would do something, like say if it was an art project or something like that, he would always praise me and say, wow, you know, that was a good job. But if it were me, I would have done it this way.
There is a duality within me that wars. There's that one that wants to please, yes, whatever you say. And the other part that rears back and says, no way, not in this life.
I am very resentful of people in authority. I harden to them. I think of ways that I can get around their authority. I think of ways that I can undermine it. You know, my mind races. I mean, it's probably one of the most visceral feelings that I experience.
All of these attempts to control others, to control ourselves, can turn people away, which feeds right into our biggest fear of all, loss and abandonment. But instead of letting go and relaxing, we often become even more controlling, sometimes to the point of paranoia.
Trust is a really big issue in my life. I don't issue it out to people very easily, and when I do, I think there's always this thing in the back of my head that tells me they're gonna break it.
There's a distance I have, even with my closest friends. They can come this close, but only so close.
On the other hand, they're capable of injudicious trust, you know, telling a complete stranger everything about them.
I don't believe that trusting and telling people stuff are necessarily the same thing. I don't mind telling you anything about my life. Do I trust you? No. Trust is actually relying on somebody else to allow you to be vulnerable. I don't do that, hardly at all.
I've had 2 disastrous marriages, not because maybe that, but I've not ever learned commitment. I've not learned the skills that it takes to keep a relationship going.
If someone does something that hurts me or breaks my trust or stabs me in the back, and I decide it's time to leave, absolutely I can leave and never look back, and I won't even blink.
I think one of the hard things about being a military brat is that in learning these chameleon skills, learning how to be whatever you need to be for whoever you're having to present yourself to at any given time, you're never allowed to be yourself. It translates as well into relationships. You know, and I think it's tied into the whole concept of intimacy. You can't truly be intimate until you can truly be yourself, in you know, warts and all.
We're like little warriors with an Achilles heel. And that Achilles heel is a vulnerability you could describe as emotional. We're so used to burying our emotions that when something triggers them, we often overreact.
I've always been a crier. I had to figure out what the triggers were for it so I wouldn't like undermine my own career by crying inappropriately. I especially cry when I'm angry.
People who consistently aren't allowed to acknowledge any feeling other than happy, bubbly, cute, and positive. It reminds me of the movie in Ghostbusters where they have this pink stream of ooze under the street. and it feeds off of angry emotions until eventually it just erupts and it causes all this tremendous damage. That's exactly what happens when people aren't allowed to acknowledge their emotions. Sooner or later, it will erupt. Now, it can erupt in one of two ways. It can make people hideously angry, so angry that their anger terrifies them. So then that anger, once acknowledged, has to get stomped down again. And when you have that kind of anger, it breeds fear. Then you're afraid. And so the more grief is repressed, the more dreams are repressed, the more thoughts, ideas, feelings are repressed, the more built up anger there is. But instead of turning that anger outward and trying to use it, I mean, anger is really a great motivator in lots of situations. That anger gets turned inward. And the result of anger turned inward is deep and chronic depression.
I don't know if the reason if I'm emotional is because of the lack of relationship I had with my dad. It may be because I can't really remember too many times where my dad would tell me, "Hey son, I'm really proud of you. Hey son, great job." I can't remember hugging him that much.
Most brats don't connect any of this to being raised in the military. We just think it's who we are. But who we are still covers a lot of territory.
Often in these families, we see one child who turns out very, very well, who's almost a super achiever, while other children in the family may have drug or alcohol problems, or some other kind of behavior that is not productive.
That may be because parents react differently to different children, which directly affects our behavior. Or because some of us move more than our siblings, or at more critical times. Fortunately, the life that causes these problems is the same life that gives us the skills and courage to solve them.
I spent some time with a counselor once, and after 3 or 4 sessions, he looked at me and just said, "Do you ever quit?" And I'm like, of course not, And it dawned on me that other people quit. They go, "I quit," but I don't. I claw. I hold on. I hold things till, and in that persistence, I usually manage to succeed.
I think that there's an upside and a downside to almost everything that military brats get from their childhoods. Military brats are resilient. That's a very positive thing. They can adapt well, they can start over well. Military brats are often willing to take risks that others are not. It's just a matter of finding the right goal, making the right connections, acquiring a mentor or two, and then sticking with it.
The first step is making the connection between our present and our past. But until recently, the logistics of that was pretty near impossible. I mean, how do you keep up with people when you're moving every 2 years?
I had actually been thinking about that and how sometimes I feel different from other people, or I think I'm different because I grew up this way. And does anyone in the world out there relate to me? And all of a sudden, there it was on somebody's license plate, militarybrats.com, and immediately I was like, I can't believe it. Wow, look at that. Militarybrats.com. I got so excited.
It's like being in a foreign country and stumbling upon a fellow countryman, and there's just a connection that you make that crosses culture and race and age.
This is the greatest day of our life.
Welcome, gentlemen, to the Heidelberg High School Reunion of the Century, celebrating 50 years of Heidelberg High School.
Look at that old photograph. Is it really you? Smiling like a baby full of dreams. Smiling ain't so easy now. Some are coming true. Nothing simple as it seems. But I guess it kind of...
There's a party and there's a dinner and everybody goes and does the typical reunion thing. But then there are little sessions where everybody just goes into their rooms and they dig out the old yearbooks, and you spend, well, saying hours is an understatement. People probably didn't sleep the whole weekend.
Ain't you come this old road.
After I had a chance to talk to my friends, it gave me a real sense of belonging again.
I felt such relief. Finally, I can be myself for the first time in, 30-some years or something like that?
Because for a long time, you're thrown out there and you're torn away from it. Once your dad retires, it's gone, and you realize, well, it's not gone. There's people that have gone through these things too, and now they're out there for me to talk to, and it's a good feeling.
Look at that old photograph. Is it really you?
Reunions aren't the only Brats-related phenomena that's exploding because of the internet. Over 70,000 have registered on the Military Brats website. 250 alumni groups have formed in 50 countries. A museum for Brats is being built in Wichita.
Home for the military brat is not a place, a point on the globe. Home for us has to be a state of mind. And I believe that one of the most important ways for us to achieve that is through understanding our military brat identity and connecting with others like ourselves. If the classroom teacher understands that central fact and develops it, helps kids to talk about their cultural identity and write about it and share those things, then the teacher is helping the child develop a strong sense of self.
The way parents can do it is to talk about it. Recall previous friends and assignments. Stop pretending we're like our cousins in Peoria. We're not, and that's okay.
I think it would be a wonderful idea for the military to help young people self-reflect on their experiences while they're going through them. And when they're adults, they will have those skills to know this is what happened to me and this is why it's happening. So it's not me that I'm a dysfunctional person. I'm not crazy.
I would have benefited so much by someone sitting down and telling me, yeah, you're going to lose some friends when you travel. Yeah, you're going to feel awkward when you go to a new school. But you know what? You can get through it. Here's some strategies.
The military is actually offering some of this now. More counseling, longer assignments. Sometimes all it takes is just listening to what we say and considering our feelings, like the general did when he told his kids they were moving again.
And my second daughter said, well, when are we going to move? And I said, oh, well, we're going to move in June so that we can have everything all squared away. See, I just thought this was perfect. And she started crying. She said, you don't understand. She said, when we go someplace, people have their groups that they run around with. And if we go someplace in June, okay, school doesn't start until September, and we're outsiders. All summer long, we're outsiders. And it's only when school starts that we're then integrated and we meet friends. So it's lonesome. Why in the world are we going in June? Why don't we go in August, the end of August, so that we go out there and bingo. See, that had never dawned on me.
I think in some ways the military could do more to recognize folks who've grown up military for what they've done, but I'm not sure how to go about doing that without it costing the taxpayers money. Again, for the military, how does it relate to their mission? How does it enhance their mission?
I absolutely believe that the entire family serves in the military.
You know, are we going to get that knock on the door, that phone call, that letter that lets us know that it's all over? I mean, we weren't on the front lines, but we were definitely there going through that conflict right with him.
I'm a little bit torn on whether or not I would have wanted formal recognition. You know, acknowledge it throughout the time our dad is away for 2 months. Acknowledge it throughout the time where we're being uprooted in the middle of the school year for a second time to go to a new school. Acknowledge that I may be 11, I may be 10, I may be 13, but my life has been dedicated to you because my dad's life is.
Olga's daddy figured it out without an official directive. He used his own promotion ceremony to thank his family for all they'd done.
He said, I would like to dedicate each point on this star to a member of my family because of everything that they've sacrificed for me to be where I am today. My children and my wife have moved so many times. They've given up so many friends. They've lived so many different places. And I know that they think that I don't know what it was like and how much they sacrificed. But the truth is I do know what it was like. And I know that I couldn't be where I am today without them. Any kind of feelings of, I don't say resentment, but any kind of feelings about it just kind of ended. I think that's just all I really needed.
I do believe my father did the best he knew how. He did what he thought was best. I think in general, once you come to that belief about your parents, you can forgive them for all the damage that they caused you or that you had to overcome in your own life. I feel like everybody's kids are going to be on the couch for some reason or another. But did my dad love us? Absolutely. That's why he had such high standards for us. Because that's what he thought would get us through life the best. That if he parented in that way, that was going to serve us best. And he's not wrong. I'm very successful. If he had been different and hadn't had standards, who knows what I'd be doing.
There are life-changing skills many of us need to learn that have nothing to do with other people and everything to do with ourselves.
The skills that I'm talking about are the ability to dream dreams and to have complete confidence that whatever it is that they want to do, they will be able to achieve. And the ability to set goals based on personal needs and wishes. When you're brought up in the military, there are goals. It's very goal-oriented, but the goals have to do with the military.
The skill we need that's hardest to learn and paradoxically the easiest to achieve is simply to let go of things we can't control. But first we need to learn to say what we feel, like the general's daughter Dr. Pressman counseled, who was estranged from her perfect quote-unquote family.
And it was a perfect family, and they always looked perfect, and they did everything perfectly, and she was angry all the time.
But she also realized this wasn't working real well, so she went back home to visit. She told her parents about an environmental lawsuit she'd won.
And her mother said, "That's nice, dear," and got up and made another pot of tea. And her father said, "Well, I wouldn't have expected less." And she said that she just sat there and stared at them and didn't say a word, and they both looked at her, and then they kind of got busy. Then she said, "You know what I want? I want the two of you to sit down. I want you to hold each other's hands, and I want you each to hold my hand, and I want you to listen. Really listen to me. I am 37 years old. I am a very successful lawyer. I have had 2 unsuccessful marriages. I really want children, but I'm scared to death to have them. And I desperately, just once, would like your approval. I would like you to say, we're proud of you, we think you're a good person, and we love you." And she said her mother burst into tears, and her father got up, went into the other room, and she thought, this is just never going to work. And he came back in, and he had tears in his eyes, and he said, "I'm sorry. You're all of those things."
I believe my brothers think and thought for years, and that's why I think they have more trouble with these issues than I do. They always expected that somehow my father would see the truth. If they talked long enough, Daddy would, throw himself at their feet and ask for forgiveness. I just realized that was just not going to happen and moved on.
I felt blessed that we were able to reconcile at some level, literally on his deathbed. It was the only way I guess he could say it, but literally hours before he passed away, he looked over at me and he grabbed my hand and he said, "Love you, man," and I just, that was just washed over me, and I can't think of any other time where my dad physically said, "I love you," in any way.
One of the ways that we worked through that type of problem was one night we got drunk together. And we sat down and we're saying, I told my father, these are the things that you used to do and everything like that. And he would say, well, these are the things I expected from you. And so after we sobered up the next day, a lot of things were just removed from that. So it was good.
A lot of times people ask me, what was it like growing up a military brat? Was it good? Was it fun? Or was it sad? Was it tough? I would have to say growing up a military brat were all those things.
I wouldn't trade my military childhood for anything. I think it's been an excellent preparation for the real world. It's given me real skills. One of the biggest of those is the diversity of views that I have. Feeling intensely patriotic and loyal to my country, and yet having a worldly view, a world mindset. Where I do have friends, I'm intensely loyal. I think I'm an orderly person, I'm a disciplined person, I'm an assertive person. Feeling as though there is nothing that you couldn't accomplish. Being a survivor, making friendships fast, and then having to deal with the brokenness of that and learning how to heal and heal quickly. I've been exposed to so much. I feel so well-rounded. I've had the best education as I've traveled all along. And there's nothing I would trade for having that kind of a richness of experiences.
It was a rich experience for me as well. It taught me courage and tenacity and honor and duty. And the value of human life. Ironically enough, all human life in every country, not just the people who look like me or think like me. And like my daddy and his daddy before him, I served my time as a brat and as a soldier, and I don't regret a minute of it. But in the end, I chose a career other than the military. It took a while, but I finally made a living out of songwriting, much to my mother's chagrin. Why did I choose music? I guess it chose me, really. It was how I thought I could make the world a better place, just like my daddy tried to do. There are no ceremonies to mark the end of our careers as military brats. We simply walk out into our destinies, into the dead center of our lives, and try to make the most of it. Our greatest tragedy is that we don't know each other. I've imagined we could all meet on some impeccably manicured field. To the ancient beat of drums, we could pass by those erect and silent fathers who would salute us one by one, and in that salute, thank us for our fortitude and courage, our generosity and long-suffering. But most of all, for something few military men have ever acknowledged. Military brats, my lost tribe, spent their entire youth in service to this country, and no one even knew we were there.
Sunset on the highway to old Mexico. Ruby like the wind upon my face. Thunder from a storm on the horizon far away. Ruby cut directly to the chase. She said, anywhere you're going, baby, you just gotta know I'm on your side. I always was. When you climb up on the stallion, you are bound to let him take you for a ride. All the way, I know I tried to make believe before the fall. Tell me how the hell you keep your spirit, remember spirit, strong enough to answer to the call. Ruby closed her eyes and faced the heaven. She said, take me to the stars one more time. I was doing 80, but I pushed her through the floor and watched her climb out of sight, out of mind. I'm still wild enough for you. You know you can count on me, baby. We used to be worth fighting for. So tell me, are we? Anywhere you're going, baby, you just gotta know I'm on your side. I always was. When you climb up on the stallion, you are bound to let him take you for a ride all the way. It's singing, I'm still wild enough for you, and you know you can count on me, baby. We used to be worth fighting for. So tell